I think that's enough of that music. Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Robin Harris. Thank you so much for joining us today for our seller impersonation fraud webinar. We've got a lot of really great information. We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about this issue that's come up. Just a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll introduce our speakers today. I am Senior Associate Counsel here at Texas Realtors. Been here since October 2019. I really have enjoyed my time, or enjoy my time working here, working with our members. I'm excited about this webinar today. What I'd like to do is introduce our speakers and let them say a little bit about themselves. Leslie Johnson.
Hi, thanks, Robin. So as Robin said, my name is Leslie Johnson. I am Vice President and Texas State Counsel for WFG National Title Insurance. I live and work in the Dallas area and have been at my company for the past 4 years.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. And we also have Josephine McGrath. Josephine.
Hi, I'm Josephine McGrath. I'm Underwriting Counsel and Director of Training Education for the Fidelity National Title Company Group. So it's Fidelity National Financial, we're Fidelity, Chicago, Lawyers Title. I'm really happy to be here. I've been with Fidelity for 8 years now. I live in the Austin area. That's where I'm broadcasting from today.
Sweating with the rest of us here in Austin today. Hey, so we got a lot to cover. I do want to quickly say we are not going to be able to address or discuss any specific issues that any of our attendees are having. We appreciate any questions you can put in the Q&A section. We will try to address those as best we can towards the end of the seminar. We'll be getting into that. If you do have legal specific questions, you can call our legal hotline for members, 512-480-8200. So without further ado, we want to get into it. I'm dating myself a little bit with my Jerry Seinfeld impression, but seller impersonation fraud, what's the deal? Josephine, can you kind of help us talk us through what's the deal?
So the deal is, it is just a fancy form of identity theft is really what it boils down to. It is the stealing of the true owner's entire persona of someone who's pretending to be them to sell real property. It's just their entire person is forged. It boils down to a attempt to steal the buyer's purchasing money. That's what's being stolen here. That's the goal of the fraud, is to steal purchase money. It actually doesn't steal the land. The true homeowners are not divested of their land. The deeds in any transaction is completely void. The goal of these fraudsters is just to get cash in as much as they can. To give you guys some, I know it's been a big hot topic of late, everyone's seeing it. For some context, I have looked at every single one that's come through the FNF region in Texas this year. Since January 1st to June 30th, I saw 200 attempts. They range from about $7,000 to $4.5 million. And if we put an average price of about $150,000, that means we've seen $30 million attempted to be stolen out of the Texas real estate market in only 6 months. It is quite an epidemic at this moment. It came about because technology is making it significantly easier for people to pretend to be someone they're not. It's a lot easier for us these days to trust, even when we shouldn't, that the person we're communicating with, either through email or text, is who they say they are. And in reality, they're not. Technology has made it a lot easier to list properties for sale when you're not the owner. On a lot of different websites, they don't verify that the person posting the listing on a for sale by owner website is in fact the owner. They don't verify this at all. So that's one area that's technology's made it easier. In addition, it's gotten very easy to get fake notary stamps. One thing about these frauds is they're not just faking their signatures. They're faking the notary stamps. They're faking every single part of the documentation that they can. So really, it's two forms of identity theft. The sellers of real property and the notaries are having their identity stolen. When I figured out how easy it was to get a fake notary stamp on, say, Amazon, I was super shocked. It is very easy. So with the technology making it easier, there is no expectation that this is going to go away. We actually expect it to get harder and more intense, especially as technology advances. The big topic words of this year are AI and deep fakes, and we foresee those becoming ways to commit real estate fraud. Anyone who's in real estate knows we're an area that's often targeted for fraud because we move large amounts of money. We handle the biggest transactions of someone's life, and we handle a lot of proceeds. So the better the technology gets, the more fraud attempts we're anticipating, and the more important it is that people understand how these frauds happen and how to prevent them. So that's your broad overview.
That's perfect. That's the deal. Well, and so Leslie, how do these how does the fraud typically play out? Can you walk us through an example or explain some of the details on that?
Oh, absolutely. So Joe kind of went the 60,000-foot view. We're going to bring it down to the 3-foot view as to how this actually happens or can come about. So it starts with looking at what type of property would be a good target for these fraudsters. They're typically going to want to get a non-owner occupied property. So it could be a vacant tract of land, or it could be something like a second home or a vacation rental or something along those lines. Something where the true owner is not going to be there and is not going to notice anyone coming to the property, or your buyer is not going to expect that owner to be at the property. So at that point, the fraudster has the target property and then reaches out to a potential listing agent and says, hey, help me list this property. I want to get a cash offer, ideally, and I want a quick close on it. And one of the key red flags that we get in these seller impersonation frauds is that the fraudster is never available in person, or you can't get the fraudster on the phone, or you can't get the fraudster in front of even a FaceTime or other Zoom communication like we're doing right now. There's always going to be some excuse like, oh, they're out of town, or they just scheduled their vacation. They need to use a remote notary to consummate the transaction and sign the documents. So once they've got the listing agent working for them, the listing agent lists the property, then they've got a buyer. Other red flags that we can see in the transactions are these seller impersonation frauds is that the seller is willing to not negotiate on closing costs, pay all closing costs, give whatever concessions that the buyer wants. And also that oftentimes they will take less than what was the listing price to begin with, because they're looking for any profit, and any money they get from the sale is pure profit to them at that point, because they don't have any skin in the game. They're not the true owner at that point. And in fact, Robin, if you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and share my screen. And what I'm going to show everybody on the webinar right now is a true version edited to protect the identity of the innocent or non-culpable in the transaction, and show just how normal these exchanges can look. So give me one moment as I share my screen. This is an actual text chain, or very close to what was an actual text chain that one of our title companies, a member of the Texas Land Title Association, was shown by one of their listing agents who realized that this was a fraudulent seller. So it starts off with the fraudster saying, "Hi, Ryan," the listing agent. "I saw you on Zillow and thought you would be great to help me sell my lot. Beth." The listing agent says, "Hi, Beth. Yes, I'd love to help you. Is this a good number to call you on?" Beth says, "Wonderful." Doesn't really answer the question. "The tax value says 100,000, but I'm willing to let it go for 75,000. A red flag right off the bat. Beth then asks, "Can you send me a listing agreement?" Ryan says, "I can send you a DocuSign. Please send me your email address." Beth says, "Sure." It's whatever fake email address she's set up at this point. She says, "I just signed it. We're going on a long trip and just want to get this sold as soon as possible. Let's only take cash offers so we can close quickly." Another red flag that comes up in these transactions. Ryan says, "Of course, we can't guarantee we will get a cash offer." And here's one of the biggest red flags in this transaction or this text chain here. I tried calling and my calls are only going to voicemail. Please call me so we can discuss. We still need to talk, but I put this in MLS and actually got an offer right away. However, they want you to pay for all the closing fees and the offer is for $15,000 less. Beth says, if they can close this week, I'm okay with the terms. We're anxious to get going and on our trip. Ryan says, okay, I've sent you another DocuSign with the contract. The buyer is signed and my title company said they can rush the title search. Ryan also says, we can do the closing at Trusted Title and Escrow on 123 Elm Street. Can you do 10 a.m. next Monday? And the final red flag of the text chain is, actually, we're going to be out of town on Monday visiting my mom who is 99 this month. Sounds plausible, right? We can just use a notary and FedEx everything back to the title company. So one of the big things I wanted to point out with that is that there was no in-person contact between the listing agent and the purported owner of the property. And it seemed so normal. I would suspect that many of you on this webinar have had similar exchanges with owners of property getting ready to sell the property. But this is how the fraudsters get in and start their seller impersonation fraud. And so we saw how it kind of started there. And Robin, if you'll humor me for just a minute more, I wanted to show something else. If we could, give me 1 second. I want to show you kind of the end result of how bad it can potentially be. So some of you may have seen this in the national news. There is a story that is circulating and it was posted in the Wall Street Journal, also Business Insider, several other publications. But this is the end result of a seller impersonation fraud transaction that actually closed. And the buyer, who purportedly bought this beautiful wooded tract of land, proceeds to build a 1.5 or approximately $1.5 million house on the property. By the time the true owner of the property realized what had happened and visits the property, it's already up. You're way past the framing on this stage. The roof is up. And now that true owner who did not sell the property, there was apparently a power of attorney that was used, given to an actual attorney in Connecticut. And it was that agent's attorney that signed the deed to the unsuspecting buyer. Now that true owner is selling the buyer in federal court, asking for damages, a quiet title, so that void deed can be removed from his chain of title, but also asking for that $1.5 million house to be removed and torn down. So this is your absolute worst case scenario that we can have in these transactions.
Well, and so Leslie, we're going to get to what happens in that situation here in just a little bit, but Josephine, I want to ask, because at the title company, this is where they should be catching that thing, right? But so what is it that realtors can do? What can members do on their end? Why is it important for them to be catching these flags early?
So I would say we, as the title companies, we actually come in too late sometimes to really be effective in catching things. I mean, ideally we should catch it before it's closing, but it needs to be caught as early as possible. And we come in a little later, and that's problematic. It's important that realtors catch this as early as possible because it's a fraud and it is in the criminal realm from the moment of the original listing. When they first get these contacts, when they're the first person they're being talked to, that's when the fraud has started. So it's important to try and end that as early as possible. One thing to note is buyers start incurring costs in their transactions early. We had one where the buyer paid to have the whole lot surveyed. And it was a seller impersonation fraud, but the surveyor is demanding to be paid and the buyer's going to have to eat that cost. And it's very sad because had they found the fraud at the time of listing, those thousands of dollars wouldn't be going for a worthless survey. So it's important to note that buyers incur costs before title companies get involved. And even if a realtor reaches out to us early and says, hey, can you verify this for me? As the title company, all we can really do is look at a commitment and tell you who's the vested owner. We can't tell you that the person you're talking to is the vested owner. So we're later in that scheme. In addition, we are trying to help realtors avoid wasting their time and their costs. It costs you time, resources, energy to list something. If it's a fraudulent listing, it is a void transaction. It is completely a legal nullity. In that Connecticut case, I fully expect that the true owner is going to win and win easily. They're going to have title put back in their name because legally they never lost it. You cannot sell someone else's land. So I want realtors to be able to vet these quickly so they're not wasting their time on files that are not going to close because we're going to discover it's fraud, or if they do close, are going to be huge losses because they're going to be a crime. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Title companies are not set up to investigate fraud and that kind of activity, and it's the realtor who should be having the face-to-face interactions, personal interactions, who are best able to figure that out.
Yeah, we don't have connection to this seller until, quite some time into the fraud was when we're going to make our first connection with them to find the fraud. So that's why we're trying to help everyone be part of the solution here as the goal.
Well, and Leslie, so let's go back and talk just a little bit about the fraud. Let's say the fraud is successful. The fraud happens, the imposter gets away with the money. How does that look? What happens to the buyer, and what are the risks for both title companies and for realtors at that point?
Oh yeah, well, it's not pretty, whichever way you want to slice it or however you look at it. So starting from the legal basis, Joe's mentioned it several times, but Texas case law, and I would gather to say most other states' case law, is likely going to be pretty darn clear that a deed that is forged, and so that's absolutely what we're talking about here. Someone is pretending to sign the name of the true owner, but they are not in fact the true owner. So any deed that is consummated or signed through forgery is, like Joe said, an absolute nullity. It is void. So you can't even ratify it or later agree to it and somehow make it valid on the backside. It's not a possibility. It's a void deed. So the buyer gets nothing from the transaction, even if they've wired their funds into the title company and the title company has sent them to who they thought was the true owner. The buyer gets nothing, even though they have a deed from the purported owner. So to the extent the buyer has purchased a title policy, that turns into a full loss on the title policy, because on the owner's side, the title insurance policy provides that and guarantees that the owner has full title to this particular piece of property, which they don't after a fraudulent deed. So it's a full loss and a major loss for the title company and the title underwriter, the title insurance company. But you've also got some risk to the agents that are part of this transaction. There's actually provision of the Texas Occupations Code that gets into the licensing and requirements through TREC. But there's a provision which says that TREC has the ability to suspend or revoke a license holder's license if they purport to sell a property without the authority or consent of the owner of that real property. So it almost sounds like maybe that's not what was initially intended with that particular statute, but that is the reality of what is happening if that listing agent is working with a fraudster. They have sold the property without the consent of the true owner. So there's the possibility your license could be in some jeopardy if you do not take sufficient actions or exercise sufficient due diligence to try and find out or confirm that the individual or persons that you're working with are indeed the true persons. But in addition, like we saw in this Connecticut case that we talked about, there is legal liability too. Someone is going to be left holding the bag. You've got upset people on both sides of the property. And if you actually read that Connecticut story, it is a heartbreaker because the true owner loved how wooded the property was and intended to pass it down to his grandkids. I mean, everything that you can imagine, right? And off from the picture that it was pretty well clear cut for that new house that is going to be potentially torn down in the future. So when people are out that amount of money, and really any amount of money, they're going to start pointing fingers. And most likely they're going to start suing. And they're going to sue anyone and everyone involved in that transaction. I've litigated for 10 years and have seen it firsthand. So that's going to include not only the buyer who is trespassing on their land, but that could also extend to the real estate professionals that assisted in that transaction. So that could be your listing agent, that could be your buyer's agent, that could be the title company, it could be anyone. So there's legal liability going around as well. And then additionally, think of the potential risk to your reputation. If you were involved in one of these and you can't stand up and say, well, I did everything I could to verify that this person who came to me and said they own the property was in fact the true owner, it's realistic that folks may not want to work with you again in the future if you've got one of these attached to your name at that point. So you've got some reputational liability as well.
Yeah. To add on to that Connecticut case, the just the news reporting, each one names the realtor who put up the MLS listing, states that the reporters were trying to get a hold of the person and they couldn't. And one of the articles actually ends in the phrase, the buyers are planning to sue all real estate professionals involved in the transaction. So it's not a good position for your reputation to have those articles with your name, just forever findable.
And what about your E&O policy, Leslie? If you've got your E&O coverage, are you able to just, once you get the notice of the lawsuit, just send it over there and get covered?
It's likely that there wouldn't be coverage. Certainly can't speak directly to the E&O policies that the agent may have, but it's typically, or this is typically not considered to be an error or an omission that would fall within the scope of what is covered under that E&O policy. So it's more of a question of, is that agent acting as they should in the typical and ordinary course of their actions in listing the property, unfortunately.
And so as far as the lawsuit goes, the case in Connecticut, how does that the owner just gets the house that's built on there? Do we know like what happens there once it gets past the stage where somebody's moved into the house, started building on things? Mm-hmm. What happens? How do we unwind? How do we rewind back to put things how they were in the past?
Well, I'll talk about the Connecticut case for just a minute. The way the Connecticut case is postured is primarily what's known as a quiet title suit. And that is a lawsuit that is used to clear title for any adverse claims. So that buyer who's sitting there with the void deed signed by the fraudster would be that adverse interest or that adverse claim on the property. So likely that that owner of the property is going to ask for a judgment saying that deed is void, and then they would go ahead and record that judgment in the real property records. But what's interesting about the Connecticut case is that they've also asserted a trespass claim. I mean, that house is quite literally trespassing on the owner's property. And I believe they're also asking for an injunction to stop the construction and then remove the property as well because of the trespass and because they don't own the property at this point. But to speak to the other kind of aspect of your question, let's say this closing just closed, or the seller impersonation fraud was unfortunately successful. It just closed. No $1.5 million houses have been built on this beloved parcel of wooded land that the true owner has. How do we unwind it? So to your question, Robin, and at this point in time, there aren't any, I'll say, tried and true solutions, or solutions that all title companies and all underwriters have agreed on at this point. And there's a couple of avenues where you could do it, but it in large part depends on how cooperative and how amenable all the parties are to work together to find a solution. And we've certainly seen, and I know Joe's seen as well, situations where they are not happy and they are not going to cooperate because they feel wronged. But one option would certainly be for the buyer to give a deed back to the owner. There's problems associated with that, because what if your buyer has some adverse liens against him that may be considered to have attached to the property because of that deed back to the true owner of the property at that point. So you've got some issues with that. There's a procedure under Chapter 51 of the Government Code, which allows someone to go to a district judge and file a motion, and there's a form for it actually in the statute, and say there is an adverse claim on my property, and effectively get an ex parte, so without the other parties being served or notified, order saying, yes, this is an invalid claim on your property. But the way the statute is worded, it's not ideal, let's put it that way, for saying that this was a fraudulent deed. It's a potential tool, but it's not styled exactly the right way to deal with these fraudulent and void deeds coming out of seller impersonation fraud. There's been talk about recording an affidavit in the real property record saying that this deed, and then you cite the recording information, was the result of a seller impersonation fraud. It is void. But then the question would arise with underwriters, and and lawyers can disagree on this, as to whether that truly clears the cloud that is now on title as a result of that void deed. And then again, if you're talking commissions for the agents, if an underwriter is paying policy limits on an owner's policy because of one of these seller impersonation frauds, the underwriter is then going to engage in recoupment efforts and would potentially be asking the agents, the listing agent and the buyer's agents, to return their commissions that they received as part of this transaction. So there's going to be a lot of work on the backside, and it's not clear as to the path that it may take.
That's good. Go ahead, Josephine. Sorry.
I was going to add, most of these legal things are about clearing the title for the property for the true owner. There aren't really ways for this defrauded buyer to make themselves whole in the court, because these fraud schemes are being run electronically online. Most of the time, we believe it's being run by people who are not even in the United States. The money leaves the country. There's really no recovery being made whole avenue for these buyers other than making a claim under their policy and then suing everyone they can.
Mm-hmm. And if it's not the buyer suing everyone they can, it'll be the underwriter that's handling the claim, trying to engage in those recoupment efforts at that point. So yeah, exactly. Joe hit the nail on the head with that one. The money is gone at that point. Yeah. And as we've learned throughout the course of wire fraud becoming prevalent in the past couple of years, unless you stop it immediately, it's gone.
Yeah. So let's, Josephine, going back, you talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but what are the red flags that agents and brokers need to look out for to identify these fraudulent schemes before they happen or quickly after they've started?
So it's going to be owner unoccupied property, vacant land, as Leslie covered. It's going to be a rental home. Maybe we see homes where the true owner has died relatively recently and the family hasn't dealt with the property yet. We'll see that. So it's got to be property that's pretty empty. If the true owner lives there, they're going to figure it out quickly, so they're not being targeted. It's also going to typically be properties that don't have voluntary liens, like deeds of trust or reverse mortgages, home equity loans. This is because the fraudsters don't have the banking information to get the payoffs. In addition, the payoffs would greatly reduce the proceeds. So those are not the properties that get targeted. And the seller is always going to not claim that they cannot come to closing. They're going to claim that they're on vacation in Germany. They're going to claim that they're at work in, Hawaii. They're going to claim that they are somewhere where they cannot come to closing, and they're going to ask to have their own notary do the notarization. This is because they're going to forge the notary stamp. They're going to refuse to meet with the title company's notary, even when we set one up, because they know they can't get past our notary with their fake IDs. They're also going to give fake IDs. We did pull up some, if Leslie can share that.
Absolutely.
To help you guys see what we talk about when we say we're getting fake IDs. These are some IDs I pulled from my email. I covered any information that could be tied to a real person. Also, the pictures they're using tend to be stock photos or photos they steal online. So I also covered their faces. Or as Leslie saw, a picture of Jane Fonda, which was great. Someone actually sent a fake ID with Jane Fonda. So this is a fake ID. And the issues with it really are, in the picture, if you look, his hair is cut off. In addition, his shoulders are angled as a kind of a headshot. When you look at it, you're like, that's a really flattering angle. But everyone knows that the DMV doesn't let you take flattering angles. They're going to be straight on, forward, and they're going to not cut off anything. But in this one, he looked good, but he was not a picture you would get from the DMV. On the next one, this is too much negative space. I use this line with people. If you look at the picture, over half of it is empty. It's a very, very small picture of the guy. But the purpose of these IDs is to actually see the details of somebody so you can see if they're that same person. So look at the IDs, and if they have anything like this, the DMV would never issue it. So this is going to be fake. The next one, on this one, it was actually the fonting of the wording is the issue. If you look at some parts, it's a little fuzzy. And if you look at some of the words, they're really bright and dark. It's inconsistent. When you look at your own driver's license, they're kind of the same. But this is information where they covered up the real data and they put in new data. One thing to note is you can't rely entirely upon whether the information in the fake ID is correct. The fraudsters actually often have the true owner's identification information. They'll have their address. So many people have had their identities compromised over the years. They may even have their social security numbers. So they could often have the fake data and they're just putting it into a fake ID with a picture of somebody that's not the true owner. Another thing to look for on fake IDs is the age range. If the age range is like someone who's 60, but the picture looks like there's someone who's 25, look at that. See, does the person I'm looking at match the age? I had one yesterday where they were born the same year as my mother, but they honestly looked my age. And I was like, that's either the world's best plastic surgeon or it's fraud. So they're going to give, fake IDs are a huge part of what they're going to be doing because they have to give an ID. One thing to note is the pricing is a huge indicator of fraud because it's actually a form of social engineering. Social engineering is how fraudsters get you to agree to something that's not in your interests. So they have to set up scenarios to get you tricked. The pricing for social engineering here is that if buyers see that a property was listed for $275,000 and it's taxed at $260,000, but they're going to buy it for $150,000, that's an amazing deal. They're getting the best possible deal they can. So they're willing to overlook flaws. They're willing to skip some of the mental checks and some of the things that would normally make them hesitate because their thought process is, I'm getting such a good deal, it doesn't matter. This is not a bad thought process. I go through it all the time. I'm not a tall person and I find pants I like, they don't fit. I'm like, they're close enough, I'll get them tailored. It's that same thought process that we all use. It's just the fraudsters are manipulating it to make us overlook being lied to. So when you get these deals that seem too good to be true, it's because it's probably not true. That's one of the really, really big things I want people to think about. I've done a lot of reading about fraud since this came up. And one of my favorite quotes I saw was someone saying, anyone who believes they're not susceptible to fraud is the next target because they're the ones who don't know what to look for. So I hope now everyone knows what they need to be looking for so that we're not the next targets. And we understand we're all susceptible to being lied to. We just need to be aware of it.
And that's helpful. I was just imagining everyone watching, pulling out their IDs and looking at it to see what it looks.
I do that at least once a week. And I pull up my passport too. Yeah.
Well, and so let's talk about that. What can realtors do? What steps can they take to confirm clients' identity?
Well, if Joe's okay with it, I'll lay out two very easy ones to do. The first one is have an in-person meeting with your owner of the property, with your seller. So If you're dealing with a fraudster, that will never happen. They'll always find some excuse. Even if you offer to buy them lunch or buy them a drink or go have coffee with them, there will always be an excuse. But if they can't meet in person, at a minimum, have some sort of FaceTime, Zoom, Teams, whatever it may be, video conference with them where you can put eyes on them. If you're not able to either meet them in person or put eyes on them, that is a major red flag. And you need to, at that point, and Joe's going to talk about this later on, alert the title company and potentially take that listing down off of the MLS if you put it up at that point. So that's big thing number one. Big thing number two, and we found this on the title side as well, is send what we call a welcome letter to every address of that property that you can find and of that true owner. So what I mean by welcome letter is essentially, hi, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be working with you on listing this property, and send it via snail mail, actual real mail at the post office, and that comes in a letterbox to the address of the property, to the address of the owner showing on the tax rolls as well. Google that property owner, see if you can find another address for them. Because we found in doing that from the title company side, that is one of the, first off, cheapest. It doesn't cost much at all. Disregard the cost of stamps going up every other week, but it costs so little, and that's how true owners are so often alerted, because even if it's a vacant parcel of land, they've got a forwarding address and it will get to them. And they'll open that letter and say, well, I haven't listed this property for sale. I have no idea who this realtor is, what's going on. And of course, include your contact information so they can reach out to you. Make it as easy as possible for them. But if it is the true owner, they'll say, well, of course, yes, I am working with this person. This is not an issue. And you won't hear from them and the transaction will proceed. So those are two very easy steps that you can take at that point to get some comfort and do the due diligence to confirm that you are working with the actual true owner of the property. Joe, do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I would say ask for a copy of their ID when you start talking to them, so you can start verifying who they are. I've seen some people who ask for two IDs, two different ones, and then they compare them to make sure they match. We saw one where they sent a driver's license and a passport, and it was the same exact photo in both. And so we were like, well, that's fraud if you don't get the same photo in those. So ask for ID early. And then when you're on that video call or in person, ask them questions that the true owner would know, and make sure they're responding how your average consumer would respond. If you ask them, when did you buy the property? And all they can tell you is the exact date and the exact name of the grantor, that's weird. That's not how consumers behave. And I played this game when I was with my own family, and I would ask, like, who'd you buy your house from? And they would be like, oh, I don't remember. It was October of 1987. And they have a story behind it, but they don't have exact details. And that's how consumers behave. And that's what we're looking for. Somebody who could tell you exactly who signed a deed 20 years ago probably only knows about the deed. Or another thing to do, ask them to give you documents the true owner would have. Ask them for the survey. Ask them for their owner's policy from when they purchased. Ask them for a copy of the tax bill or the HOA statement. The fraudsters aren't going to have these things. And if a true owner should be able to provide them pretty easily. And then, so these are all like base level like things. There are also technological solutions. There are companies that offer identification services. We're not here to sell you on any of them, but you can Google them. They're available. They do cost money. There is a cost with using these programs, but they'll do authentication through knowledge-based questionnaires to confirm the identity of people. It's a lot like doing a remote online notarization, except it's just for identity verification. Also, you can use reverse lookups for their phone numbers that you have. And if you look up the phone number and it's based from somewhere that the true owner is not where they've told you they are, like say they tell you that they live in Texas, they're in Germany for work, but the phone number is coming out of, Florida. That's a sign. Or they'll tell you if it's an online only phone and it's not actually tied to a real honest to God phone. And so that's another sign of fraud. Also, you can reverse look up any photos if you can. It's actually harder to do than some people make it seem easy. I find it very hard to do, but that's another option. So there are lots of ways to just dig around. Some of them are cheap, such as Googling. I had one office, they knew that the seller was a doctor out of California. They Googled him, and the doctor on the clinic website did not match the ID. That was a free way to check. So I hope all these tips help.
And looking on Facebook, on LinkedIn, there's a lot of similar names, but that is another avenue, as Joe said, and these things, Googling, don't cost any money.
Excuse me. Yeah, these are all really helpful bits of information, Josephine. And so, as far as and we've got some questions that have been coming in, and everyone who's on, if you have additional questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll see what we can get to before we wrap up. Just kind of before we get to our takeaways, just to address a couple of the questions. How prevalent have you seen this, or percentage-wise, residential versus commercial? I know we said unimproved property is a big red flag. Is this happening at all on the commercial side that you've seen?
Yes. It's more residential, but it is, no one should think because it's commercial, it's safe. It's as
Right. Sorry, Joe.
Oh, no, I thought of another tip on how to help. If you're dealing with an entity, look at the Secretary of State website, because that information is all free, and you can look up information on entities. So if it's sellers an LLC or anything like that, and look at the address that they're having everything sent to make sure it's real. So for that.
But I'll
no,
throw a
commercial.
caveat in there too. The Secretary of State is not equipped and does not check documents for fraud. So what's up there may be the accurate, and usually is. I'm certainly going to say that, but there's the possibility that there are some forged documents up on there. If someone's really dedicated to the cause and trying to do this seller impersonation fraud in an entity, and that's always been a concern.
The long game fraudster going all the way to just setting up business entities to cover.
Saw it last month.
It's not hard to do, unfortunately. You pay the fee, and that's about it. You can get an LLC.
Yeah.
And is this, have we seen with some of the online listing services like Zillow, are those contributing to the problem? Are they making it more difficult to verify sellers' information, or is it just another thing that's kind of there?
I mean, they're aware of the issues. I know when this started coming up, I was able to list my parents' house for sale on Zillow. I took it down, but I could do it while my father watched me and freaked out about it. He was not thrilled. They are aware of the issues. I think they're taking steps, but I don't know if it's within even their capabilities of addressing. So
yeah. As part of the task force that the Texas Land Title Association has put together to address seller impersonation fraud, they've certainly reached out to the big online entities that are listing properties, the Zillow, Redfin, that sort of thing. And I believe they have gotten more amenable to removing listings once we've said, hey, these are fraudulent. Because any sort of fraudulent listing, whether it's on Zillow, whether it's on MLS, contributes to the problem and opens up the avenue for another buyer potentially being defrauded. So that's another thing too. If you as the listing agent have done the due diligence and taken the steps and confirmed that the person you're working with is not in fact the true seller, one of the best things you can do is immediately take that listing off the MLS.
That's something we didn't cover is what do you do when you found that you have a fraudulent listing? It's important to know. Number one, stop communicating with the fraudster. You don't want to continue talking to them. There's no salvaging the situation to make it a legitimate deal. It's tainted, it's void, it's done. You just want to stop all communications. In addition, you don't want to tell them how you figured out that it was fraud, because we don't want to teach them how to trick us better. So stop communicating with them. I know some people are like, I'm going to bring them down. No, it's some people really, and I understand the desire. It makes me mad that this happens. But you have to understand these are criminally backed organizations from foreign countries. It's not going to be a quick like sting operation. Number 2, terminate the listing, take it down. Number 3, notify the party, the real buyer, about what's going on and let them know that it's not going forward. They're going to be disappointed. They may have incurred costs, and it's going to be a difficult conversation, but they need to be told as early as possible to stop going forwards. And number 4 is report it to law enforcement. The more we bring this to law enforcement's attention, the better they might be as an ally for catching these big organizations and bring, because they do actually, if you watch the international news, there are ways that they get brought down. In addition, it will help us create new laws to address these problems. If we can really document it is a big legal issue. The flyer.
Jump in. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, the flyer from Realtors Association and TLTA has the information on law enforcement to contact, so you can look there.
I would also suggest contacting your normal title company as well and let them know, because what we do on the title side is the agent, the title company, learns of this purported fraud or this attempted fraud and then notifies their underwriters. And then the underwriters put out bulletins that are then shared to all of their agents saying, hey, there's a potential fraud with respect to so-and-so name, such and such property by address. And that way we can hopefully prevent any other title company from being duped by the same seller impersonation fraud. And another way and another means to stop the bleeding on these and prevent anyone else from getting defrauded.
Yes, because if they get one fake buyer, they will get multiple. Not one buyer, they will sell the same lot as many times as they can.
Oh, I was talking to one of our title companies yesterday, in fact, and they said this poor lady they talked to who owns this vacant piece of real property has had seller impersonation fraud attempts at least 3 times on that one piece of property, and it just keeps happening. So we put out a bulletin yesterday on it as soon as we heard, and are doing everything we can to help.
You know, we've gotten several questions from the buyer's side. Is there anything buyers or buyer's agents can or even should be doing as they're looking for property?
Yes, I would first off say if you are a buyer's agent, reach out to the listing agent and ask what that listing agent has done to confirm that the seller is in fact the true seller. But everything we've said for the listing agent to do, a lot of it the buyer's agent can do as well. Sort of do that Googling search and look up, okay, is this seller the true seller? They can also go to the property and talk to the neighbors potentially. Say, hey, do you know the owner of this? Are they selling the property? Is there a way I can get in touch with them potentially? So.
And Josephine mentioned earlier a flyer that was put together by TLTA and Texas Realtors. That was, we had a QR code at the beginning on a slide at the beginning of this, and we'll put that back up here in just a little bit as we wrap up so that you can download that. It's also, the QR code is in our magazine, the July issue, on our seller impersonation fraud article. So a few other questions. Let's see. What is there as far as rental properties go? Are there any specifics as far as rentals go? I know that Trek here was trying to warn people of fake applications and then totally different people moving into properties. But have you seen anything? And I guess title companies maybe don't see so much rental property information now that I'm asking the question and talking my way through it.
No, I would say sending that transaction confirmation letter is good at rentals, because if there's a tenant in there, they will contact their landlord and ask, why are you selling the house I live in? So that's one of the benefits with the rentals. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same.
Yeah, and for the buyer's agent too, I mean, the same idea, go to the property, knock on the door, speak to the tenant. Have you heard if your landlord's selling the property? I mean, same thing what Joe just said with regard to the confirmation letter, the welcome letter. They'll talk to their landlord, especially if they just signed a renewal of that lease. So
we did get a question about foreign seller, if they're located in a foreign country using a POA, would the POA notarized by the U.S. Embassy be sufficient for verification in the due diligence process? So I guess it's just, for those people abroad, Josephine, I see you're ready. What steps should we take there?
As much as possible, do a remote online notarization. If they're a U.S. citizen, push for that. The programs don't work for non-citizens. It's a technological limitation. It's not a legal rule. It's that the programs just don't function that way. People are forging the embassy stamps. So if you have somebody signing in the embassy, they claim to, those are forged as much as a regular notary stamp. What we're having people do is call the embassy and confirm that what we're being shown, in fact, was signed in the embassy. And many times it is not. So if you've got somebody who's also, it's a red flag to me when a average consumer knows how easily when there's willingly saying, oh, the embassy will take care of that for me. Your average consumer doesn't know where to go overseas to get signatures done. In addition, there is the apostille system under the Hague Convention for getting notarizations done overseas with overseas notaries outside of the embassy. That's another thing to consider as an option. But I am very hesitant at this moment to accept embassy signatures because especially if they're out of South Africa, they're loving forging the ones from South Africa right now. Don't know.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, there was a really rampant scheme where, as Joe said, there were embassy signatures that were forged from the South African embassy. So it was, for whatever reason, it was really rampant a couple of years ago, but those embassy signatures are oftentimes forged. And you mentioned POA, this goes back to kind of everything every title person learns at the beginning of their career is why in one of the biggest transactions of a person's life are they not going to want to be at closing? So start from the baseline that it's unusual to use a power of attorney, except in extenuating circumstances, health being one of those. But ask the questions, why is a power of attorney necessary? And think about the response that you get as well. Use some common sense. Does that sound like a good reason, or are they just busy? So we've got limitations on the title side as far as when we can accept and when we can reject powers of attorneys, but or power of attorneys, there we go. But we always want to know the reason why, and we're really starting to take a much more critical look at those powers of attorney as well, and whether we should be accepting them.
It's funny, those power of attorney documents, you can just do a search and pull up just the basic one for the state of Texas and have that filled out. While Josephine, you were talking earlier, I just pulled up Amazon on my computer,
Right.
and you can buy a notary stamp for $20 and have all your information put on there. So the forgery thing, it's hard when you're trying to be such an honest, regular person, and it's so easy to get this stuff done. Go ahead.
I would say you're going to find I think you can speak for most of the title companies, we're going to be very strict on requiring that our notaries be used. We're not going to be very amenable. We've stopped being very amenable to, and it's one of those things where we used to kind of be at times okay with it, but some people have ruined it for everyone. And so we're going to be very strict on requiring that it be our notaries or either in our offices or our mobile notaries or our remote online notaries, because that is how we're protecting ourselves, is by insisting that we control the notarization. And so if your title agent used to be flexible and now they're not, you can blame me. And you can also, but now why, is that that's why we can't be as necessarily as customer service as we would like to be sometimes, because it's fraud.
And so we're getting kind of close to the end. So that's a good takeaway is for everyone to kind of be patient with your title offices and those types of requests for using specific notaries. But what are some other takeaways that everyone who's logged in today can leave with to help prevent these types of situations from happening again?
Well, I would point to knowledge of the red flags that Joe went over. no in-person communication, quick close, want to use their own notary, not available in person for closing or any other transaction, can't get them on the phone ever, everything's by email or by text. So know the red flags and then know what to do when you start seeing those red flags as well. Don't run past them. But I also want to put a positive spin on it as well, in that this is really a great opportunity for everyone on the call, title and realtors, to show your value to the customer as well. Because what we're doing is all for the protection of the customers and the transaction. So if you can say you did these things and tell the customers why we're doing those things, it's to protect you and to make sure you're not throwing money away. It's something you'll never get back. That's an opportunity for future business at that point.
And I think my big takeaway with people is to remember that a con man stands for confidence man. There's somebody who's trying to make you trust them rather than yourself. Nobody on this call is uneducated in how real estate works, or is new, or is so, everyone's got involvement. You have reasons to trust your instincts. Trust them. I know we're in a rough market in many ways right now. And so it's really hard to say no to a file. And I feel that. And I can empathize with that. But if things aren't smelling right, trust your gut, trust your instincts. Reach out to a title company for a second opinion. We're happy to do that, because we would rather help you stop a fraud early than have to be a co-defendant with you when they sue us.
Yeah, it's good to know, because there's the Trek duty of competence. There's and as Leslie said earlier, for those policies, it may be a question of negligence, right? And so protecting yourselves and just doing that bit of work at the beginning will really protect you. You can show that you were not acting negligence, that you were competent, and that you were taking all of the steps to confirm this person. That will keep you out of the courtroom, keep you out of the newspaper, like what happened in Connecticut. So we've got 4 more minutes. I guess we've got a lot of questions that keep coming in. So I'm just gonna keep us going until 2 o'clock. Let's see. We had as far as people in other states, for an out-of-state seller, can the seller go to the office of an affiliate broker or maybe title company, whatever we have in other states? Is something like that possible?
Often, yeah.
I think that would be possible. Certainly start talking to your title company as soon as that becomes an issue. Let them know what's going on. And I mean, again, it comes down to the due diligence that has been done. But if that title company's got affiliates or sister companies or companies they've worked with in that other state, that's a great alternative.
Yeah.
But then Joe mentioned it earlier, there's always a RON transaction that has those knowledge-based authentication questions built in to the proprietary software that does that identity verification and identity proofing.
We did have a question. Australia, you mentioned South Africa. Have you seen much from Australia, Josephine, as far as those notaries or other stamps?
Not enough that it's registered. I think I've seen South Africa and Germany the most, but they might be getting creative and going to Australia.
Yeah. AI, you mentioned AI earlier as well. Is that a voice thing, a photo thing? How is AI being used specifically? Have you been able to tell?
It's not been used yet that I'm aware of. It's just that if AI continues advancing as expected, a fraudster will figure out a way to use AI to trick us. It's just the nature of what we do. We have so much money in our accounts that we're handling for these parties, these people. It's the biggest deal of their life. And the actual transferring of the money is where it's the weakest in their entire lives. So as technology advances, and there's going to be bad actors who are seeking to attack those weak points. And we are paid and retained to protect that spot. So we're not aware of AI being used yet, but we're watching to see if it happens. And we're going to watch and be prepared as much as we can.
Right. I think you're I don't want to say doomsday scenario, but one of the concerns would be a lot of people have heard in the news a professor doing some sort of presentation on something, and then he gets on and says, well, that was actually AI doing me, talking about something that a speech that I never did. So we talk about get on FaceTime, get on Zoom, get on Teams with the potential seller. What if that is a deep fake of that seller? So again, we have not seen this, and then you can talk about going the extra yard. Definitely be going the extra yard, but it's not wholly outside the realm of possibility.
Something to keep something to keep an eye out for. So I'd like to thank our panel members, Josephine McGrath, Leslie Johnson. Thank you so much for coming on, joining us today. We had some great participation, good questions. I think that we've learned a lot about the fraud, what it is, why it's happening, and especially some good takeaways on how to prevent it. Our members who are logged in, if you want to follow up with a little bit more information, the July issue of the Texas Realtors magazine did have, we do have the article on that. And we will be putting the slide back up that has the QR code if you want to get that flyer. It's a 2-page flyer. Additionally, we will have a recording of this webinar posted on our Risk Reduction Committee webpage on our website, texasrealestate.com. So if you're looking to rewatch or to share, you should be able to find that. May be available in some other places too. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your time today and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you, Josephine and Leslie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.